Coin Bureau fam, and welcome to another episode of Q&A. Now, it's just me here today, but be that as it may, I've got a lot to say. So without further delay, here's some reasons why you should stay around. Today, we're going to be covering things like Avalanche versus Solana, which has more long-term potential, when alt season, or indeed, if alt season. Some interesting hot altcoin picks in the Bitcoin L2 space. Does Monero have any future? Wen Pivot, and many other questions. So, of course, if you guys do like these videos, please fire up those likes and subscribe down below if you're not subscribed already. So, enough pitter-patter and beating around the blockchain. Let's dive in with the first question. And this is from Huzarari, and he's asking, will Monero ever become a thing again? Yeah, this is a really good question, and it's specifically important for me because after Bitcoin and Ethereum, when I first started investing in cryptocurrency back in 2016, Monero was in 2017, Monero was my third altcoin pick, and I was fascinated with Monero, and I still am. I think that in terms of a cryptocurrency with strong technology, it's second to none in terms of its privacy preserving technology, things from stealth addresses to ring confidential transactions, everything they did with regards to the mining algorithm to make it more decentralized, so a very decentralized network, as well as things like bulletproofs, which made it a lot cheaper of a blockchain, a lot quicker, a lot cheaper transactions. So in all respects, and because it never been cracked, all of these factors made me enamored with Monero. So far, it's proven to be that way from the tech perspective. But of course, all of these factors have made Monero public enemy number one for many agencies, government agencies around the world. And as a result, from the pressures they've been putting on exchanges, it has been delisted by many. And I talked about this actually end of last year in a Q&A, and I said the same thing. I said, I think that Monero is an amazing cryptocurrency. I'm bullish on its technology. I think it could be one of the cryptocurrencies that really in the future, when we're going towards a dystopian tech state, that could free us from the transparent blockchains. But I also did hypothesize that, look, things like Binance, for example, they at that time still listed Monero. And I thought, well, now Binance is going to have an independent monitor from the treasury within the organization. They had to settle many fines, and they're more likely to have to delist, and they're going to be forced to delist. And lo and behold, about a month ago, Binance decided to delist Monero. And not only that, just this week, there was news that local Monero, which has been around since 2018, one of the equivalents of local Bitcoins, allowed people to buy Monero through cash transactions, and peer-to-peer shut down. And there was many other things as well. I mean, of course, the people will mention things like, okay, there's atomic swaps for off-chain transfers and stuff. And previously, there was the option with Samurai Wallet to be able to switch Bitcoin with Monero. But if you guys have been following the news, of course, the Samurai devs had been arrested and they've been shut down. So there is a massive movement by the governments and agencies to shut down privacy-preserving tech. And of course, although Monero's privacy protocol had never been broken, if you tramp down enough of its liquidity, you inhibit its potential for mass adoption, and you inhibit its potential for more users onboarded to the network. So I think it's going to struggle. I don't think it's ever going to be completely tramped down. There's still a lot of hardcore cypherpunk devs working on it. I think that there's a community behind it. And I also don't think that, for instance, there was the Forbes report from 2 weeks ago that said that Monero is one of those good-for-nothing dead blockchains. If you watched the Q&A last week, I said I don't think that that's a fair characterization. Monero is not good for nothing. Monero does have a use case, and Monero will always be the peer-to-peer anonymous digital cash. But in the short to medium term, governments will be able to tramp down and inhibit any more adoption of it. So yeah, that's just my view on Monero right now. Okay, on to the next question. And this is from Vic Toy. And he's asking, how would Coin Bureau compare the value of Solana versus Avalanche? Yeah, that's a really good one for L1 competitors. So full disclosure, I hold AVAX in my personal portfolio. I've held it for quite some time, and I do not hold Solana. However, a lot of the team members do. We generally have been quite bullish on Solana over the past few months. We've done numerous updates on it. We also did an Avalanche update about 2 months ago as well, but we basically I want to try and approach this completely impartially and view it and take a look at compare and contrast the different components of the tokenomics, tech stack, and future update plans, and then basically give you a fully impartial view on which I think has potential over a particular time frame. So I think let's quickly start off with the comparisons between them. The architecture, so Avalanche has a 3-chain architecture: C-chain, X-chain, and P-chain. One of them is the smart contract chain, the exchange chain, the consensus chain, whereas obviously Solana is one monolithic blockchain where all the dApps are developed on. So these have different pros and cons and different use cases, which I'll come to in a bit. When it comes to consensus, Solana operates a proof of history and combined with a proof of stake, whereas Avalanche has a Snowman consensus mechanism or Snow consensus mechanism, which allows Avalanche to get TPS of about 4,500 transactions per second. However, Solana has about 5,000 transactions per second, and they're testing now to take it up to 65,000 transactions per second. So it's highly performant, and especially when they release FireDance, which we'll come to, Solana could theoretically be much faster and from a throughput perspective than Avalanche can. In terms of dApp development, one would think that obviously because Avalanche has the C-chain, the smart contract chain, which is EVM compatible, it makes it a lot easier for Ethereum or Solidity developers to build on Avalanche, whereas Rust-based programming for smart contracts on Solana has often been compared to chewing glass. However, having said that, the TVL on Solana is now, I think, about 3.9 billion, whereas on Avalanche, it's only about 900 million. So it seems that devs are favoring Solana over Avalanche right now. On tokenomics perspective, Solana has about 448 million SOL out in circulating and no maximum supply. When it comes to AVAX, they've got a 380 million 380 million circulating and a 720 million max supply. So it's got a max supply, although Solana's going to have a terminal inflation rate of 1.5%. From token utility perspective, I think that SOL is obviously used for staking and transaction fees, which obviously drives demand for SOL, and similarly on the Avalanche front. Although, and this is something we'll talk about in a bit, when it comes to AVAX subnets, you don't have to. It's not a criteria to use AVAX as gas within that subnet. So that may limit potential demand from a transaction perspective if a lot of subnets do launch and they don't want to use AVAX as the native gas token. And then, of course, from a UX perspective, I think that fees on Solana, for one, fees on Solana are like mere fractions of a cent. We're talking 1/100th of a cent, whereas on Avalanche, they're about 2 cents per transaction. So I think that Solana has an edge there when it comes to cost of transactions and transaction fees. Customization is much more favorable when it comes to Avalanche because of these subnets. These subnets allow, obviously, projects to build their own customized subnets subject to their own needs. And like I said earlier, they can use their own gas tokens within them. And there's a lot of projects, both in RWA space and also in gaming, that have utilized AVAX subnets. On the gaming side, lots of people are excited about this for games like Off the Grid, Shrapnel, and a few others that are using these subnets. And then on the RWA side, there's things like the JP Morgan's Onyx and a few others. Whereas Solana, you kind of have to use their blockchain according to their rules. So you can't customize your own environment when it comes to Solana. Interoperability, I would say that Avalanche potentially has more interoperability because of the C-chain, smart contract chain, and the EVM compatibility. Although Solana does have options when it comes to the likes of EVM, EVM like Neon EVM, which is running on Solana, but is EVM compatible. Now, a big one, of course, that many will mention on the Solana side or on the AVAX side about Solana is the scalability and downtime. Solana has had a history of going down quite regularly. Obviously, they did pretty well over the past from 2023, and they almost reached a year of no downtime until February 2024, when the network did go down. So they are improving. They're getting better. Whereas Avalanche, I think that there was one time back in 2023, March 2023, when you had issues with regards to the P chain. When it comes to decentralization, I think that Avalanche requires about 2,000 AVAX locked up to run a subnet, which is quite a lot of money. Although on the Solana side, the hardware requirements to run a validator are quite high. So both of these could impact on potential decentralization. And then, of course, the last is potential updates. And I think that this is where Solana leads it out in terms of like one of the biggest updates everyone's focused on is FireDancer, this new validator client, which will not only make it a lot easier to run a validator, so come back to those requirements for hardware, but it will also make it highly performant and take it up to that 60K TPS level. Whereas on the Avalanche side, I don't think there's too many really exciting updates in the next few months from a tech perspective that are going to take it to the next level in terms of scalability. Price potential in the short term, though, I would say because obviously Avalanche has a lower market cap and a lower circulating supply right now, it has more potential from a price perspective in the short term. However, I think that once you start rolling out FireDancer, and if we do start seeing the wide range in altcoin season, then I think that a lot of the developers are going to flock towards Solana, and then that could give it the rocket fuel it needs to continue its upward trajectory. So yeah, I think that both have strong potential. I hold Avalanche. I hold AVAX. I do not hold Solana or Sol, but I fully on board with its ease of use, its simplified UX and UI in terms of the client wallets and everything. And the tech updates are something I'm really excited for. So that's a long-winded way of saying I'm bullish on both projects, but I think in the short term, price potential on AVAX, potentially a bit more than Solana. But when altcoin season does come around and the updates, you're going to see a lot of fireworks coming from Solana's FireDancer. Okay, on to the next question. And speaking of Solana, this is actually an interesting one. It's from T.S. Constantinus. And he's asking, do you believe there is a possibility or use case for a layer 2 on Solana? Explain. Well, no, I don't actually think so. I think that Solana doesn't have a issue when it comes to fees and scalability, which is a part of the reason why a lot of layer 2s are developed on Ethereum. I think that, if anything, Solana's got incredibly low fees, which has led to a situation of spamming transactions and a lot of failed transaction, which they've addressed with the latest update to the priority fees. I think that therefore there's not a need for L2 solutions right now. Of course, they can be built. I just don't think there's a need. I think that the Solana's angle from the whole singular monolithic blockchain is its MO, right? And why everyone wants to build on it. And you don't have to take my word for it. Obviously, the main man, Solana's CEO and founder, Anatoly Yakovenko, also spoke about this quite a few times. I'll take you back to, I think it was last year, when he was talking about the concept of layer 2s and whether Solana would ever need one. He said, of course, people can build it, but it really doesn't solve the solution which Solana is trying to look for, which is to synchronize a global atomic state machine that is as fast as the physics will allow. That's a quote. So obviously that's what Solana is trying to angle towards. And all of these things, such as the tech for data availability and validating, etc., do not expand this global atomic state machine. And he was also quoted on I think it was a Lightspeed podcast earlier this year, where he said, look, things like L2s, they fragment the user base, which is true. If you think about all of the Ethereum L2s out there, you're going to have people are building or deploying on different L2s, transferring between those L2s sometimes takes a lot of time with these bridges, and you've got long wait periods. So it does fragment that user base. I think that he used examples of how it's difficult from his background and experience utilizing, database management. He used an example there where it's hard to try and interoperate between these different sort of blockchains and databases. And at a massive enough scale, L2s can create, quote, compostability and massive UX sync issues. And for Solana, it wants a synchrony around the world in different locations, all central all central to what Solana wants to do. So yeah, I encourage you to listen to the podcast. I'll link to it below. But I do not think there is a need right now for any sort of L2s on Solana, and it's not actually what Solana is trying to angle for.
I was trapped inside a cage made out of the daily grind.
I was so unfulfilled. I felt like a blank sheet of A4 paper.
Something was missing from my life, but I didn't know what.
But then I found what I'd been missing.
The Coin Bureau deals page was the answer to my prayers.
It had everything I needed to make me complete.
Exchange sign-up bonuses of up to $60,000.
The biggest discounts on the best hardware wallets.
Trading fee discounts of up to 60% on the best crypto exchanges.
Exclusive altcoin alpha.
Thank you, Coin Bureau, for bringing me back to life.
Now, on to the next one. And we've got this one from Rick Blend 222. And he's asking, when altcoin season? Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I mean, should we ask if altcoin season? Should we ask, was there an altcoin season? Because there's so many people who are trying to come to a consensus around this. Because I've seen a few reports that said, oh, well, Q1 was a bit of an altcoin season. If you look at some of the cryptocurrencies that performed, some altcoins did light the roof on fire in terms of their price relative to Bitcoin. And especially in the meme coin side, meme coin March madness. But I will counter that. So that's what some people have been saying. I don't think this definitely wasn't an altcoin season. The ones that most come to expect, primary of which is of course that Bitcoin dominance has been in an uptrend. And I'll link to a chart below as well from Benjamin Cowan, which he shared about a few days ago, that looked at Bitcoin dominance in different cycles and seasons. And you can tell very clearly when an altcoin season is and when an altcoin season isn't. And also, not just that, I mean, other stats and figures you can look at that could be coming with an altcoin season, and then you should probably keep a check on to see if we could be near an altcoin season. There's a lot of stuff coming from the retail side. So retail interest in crypto and retail trading flows and stuff. So, I mean, I'll quote one, for example, trading volume on exchanges. Coinbase released their Q1 report, which was very good, but in terms of trading volume for retail, they saw 58 billion in Q1 versus 177 billion in Q4 of 2021. So as comparison, that's a large percent down, which basically shows that we're still nowhere near those peak altcoin mania days. Obviously, social sentiment is still nowhere near. You can take a look at YouTube views and YouTube stats. You can take a look at Google search terms for things like altcoins and crypto. You can take a look at the types of content. One thing I monitor a lot is the types of content that does well on YouTube, and it's not the kind of content that retail newbies would be interested in coming into the crypto space. That's not the stuff that's not doing well. It's generally a lot of the crypto content that's doing well is stuff for crypto natives. So, I think that there's many of these factors you can watch that have shown that there was no altcoin season, and you should keep an eye on, you should keep an eye on to track whether there is going to be some signs of an altcoin season brewing. So back to the question more intently of when altcoin season, I think what we do need is more liquidity into the markets for that rotation to happen, for more retail to come back. Liquidity in the form of course, could mostly come from the Fed, but also other factors, things like people viewing now the potential of a TGA, the Treasury General Account, liquidity flowing out of that as it gets drained towards the end of the year. Potentially that adds fuel to the crypto markets and altcoins as well. But we do need some easier monetary environment for retail to be able to, especially with the cost of living going on now, interest rates are so high. I think that retail will only start dabbling again in more speculative crypto investments once the macro environment becomes better. When that could happen, well, we've got another question about the Fed pivot, which I'll come to, but I think it's potentially something towards Q3, Q4 before we start seeing liquidity flowing back into the altcoin space. So that's when I think we could see altcoin season. Next question, and this is from Devon BC88, and he is asking, Mount Gox coins being sold, will it crash markets? Yeah, this is a good one, because obviously Mount Gox felt, look, I mean, people, as long as we've been in crypto, we've been this Mt. Gox flood always flies up again and again and again, right? Those 146,000 Bitcoin that could be sold, how is that going to impact on the market? It was with us in the previous cycle and people were doom posting about it. But I also posted a Twitter thread on this more recently as well, and I think it's important now because now seems to be crunch time. I think that there's a lot of movement happening. Obviously, the trustee is getting ready to disperse a lot of these payments. They've already started on the fiat side. They know they have a deadline coming towards this year. They have to do it. And like I say, if you follow the emails coming from the trustee to the creditors, as well as some of the feedback on the Mt. Gox forum, there's people being paid out in fiat right now, and usually there's an update that gets sent around in a circular to these creditors, and they updated this about a month ago about the fiat disbursements, and people started receiving it into their bank accounts. So if you were to use that logic, pretty soon, given that there was more recent updates about the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash disbursement, it's pretty likely that the coins will start flowing. There's things you can watch in terms of, there's a Mt. Gox balance bot, which is on Twitter, which we'll link to as below as well, that you can monitor to see if the coins are moving. But this could obviously be a tail risk that's out there that is probably going to happen in the next few months. The question is then, of course, will they sell? I think that if you've been out there without the coins and you've been waiting in the bankruptcy procedure for at least 10 years, you're not as likely to want to sell. You're not as desperate. So they may not necessarily want to sell, especially the guys who hold Bitcoin as an investment for the long term. However, if there's been investment funds that have bought bankruptcy claims over the years and they're looking to close out that trade at a profit, they may sell. So that's a risk, of course. One thing you could potentially consider doing, and I mentioned this in that Twitter thread as well, is you could, if you want to hedge this risk, I think that, remember, it's not only Bitcoin that's been dispersed, but also Bitcoin Cash, because the fork came after the Mt. Gox bankruptcy. I think that all investors on many stripes are unlikely to want to hodl Bitcoin Cash. Sorry to the Bitcoin Cash maxis out there, but yeah, I don't think they're going to want to hodl that. And if they're looking to make some, get some liquidity, they're going to sell most of their Bitcoin Cash. So I think that Bitcoin Cash is going to fall much more than Bitcoin in the case of any sort of disbursements. So if you are looking to hedge the risk of Bitcoin downside on a Mt. Gox disbursement, I would consider shorting Bitcoin Cash. Of course, not financial advice, DYOR, but that's just something you may consider, because I do think that that's more likely to occur than people wanting to sell out of Bitcoin. Anyways, next question is from Dots Som Man Yodots. Really sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. And he's asking, does ENA have other use case than just governance and lockup? If not, is that enough? Yeah, so ENA, of course, is the governance token of Ethena, which is the issuer of the synthetic dollar USDE. Now, I've talked about this before in both a Q&A about 3 weeks ago, which we'll link to, as well as a post on coinbureau.com about a week ago. I went into it in depth. Obviously, it's this synthetic dollar, a tokenized cash and carry trade that is quite intuitive. And many people obviously, fear about it in terms of like, is it any sort of like, is there any UST equivalent here? But I don't think that's a fair characterization. And as I explained that in the Q&A, more specifically to the ENA token itself, look, right now, there hasn't been much stated apart from the use case as just governance. So basically being able to govern the protocol and decide, for instance, which exchanges to deploy and which DEXs to use. Those are the things I can think about right now, potentially decision making at that level. So right now it seems to be just governance. And I think that's partly most of the reason for that. And a lot of the projects trying to go just down the governance route is because that potentially, is legally more sound than trying to embolden other use cases for the token that think about and encourage profit, which is obviously one of the problems for the Howey test. But yeah, I think right now it's mainly just governance. Is that enough? Well, I think that if you've seen a lot of the governance tokens from other projects, it's seen as a proxy or a beta play on the protocol, a bet on the protocol itself. So if the protocol is doing well, people are going to want to bet on that protocol, and the only thing they can really do is the governance token. In this case, you can't, USD is obviously the synthetic dollar, which is issued and which has been growing exponentially. It's about 2.2 billion now in issuance. But if you want to bet on the long-term value and sustainability of Ethena, you'll bet on the governance token. So that's why ENA has done very well, especially more recently with an announcement by Bybit, I think, they're going to integrate USDE for trading pairs, which is a big news as well, because it's now going to be utilized as some sort of a liquidity option on these exchanges to trade against. So that's partly what's driven it. And obviously there's going to be reserve funds which people can also potentially vote on in terms of allocations, which is another thing that they can build into the governance component. But right now, it seems to be most of the excitement and interest around Ethena can be bet on through the governance token, which is ENA. Maybe later on they will build in additional use cases. Sometimes projects do that, and that is decided via governance vote. Maybe there's on the fee side of it, who knows. But right now, it's that. And I think for the short term, as long as Ethena keeps doing well in terms of growing, and becoming a predominant synthetic dollar, then people are going to want to bet on that, and that's going to be focused on ENA then. Okay, and on to the next question, and this is from JamesXX.90, and he's asking, Wen Pivot? We had Wen Alt season, now Wen Pivot. Well, both Wen events are pretty much tied. So the pivot, so that's when obviously the Fed is going to start bringing down interest rates, right? This was started off the year thinking it was probably going to be March or towards May, and then ever since the data started coming out, it wasn't looking too good on the inflation side. The Fed has decided, let's keep that higher and higher. Right now, in terms of interest rate futures, they're predicting the first pivot about September time, right? And in total, for this year, potentially 2 interest rate cuts of 25 pips, so about 50 bips in terms of down at the end of the year. So pivot will come about September, at least according to the interest rate futures. Now, what else could fly around that could change that? I mean, for one, there's the question around what's going on with, remember the Fed has the dual mandate, right? One is obviously to keep inflation below the 2% target, and the other is full employment, which is they judge full employment as when interest rates start going above when unemployment starts going above 4%, then they start to worry. And right now it's at 3.9%. So, if what happened last year when we had from April to May, we had about a 30 basis points or 0.3% up in unemployment from April to May. If that happens this time, then we're above the 4%. Then the Fed's got to start worrying, no longer just focused on the inflation side of the dual mandate, but also got to worry then what are we going to do about unemployment that seems to be creeping up? Do we need to start considering lowering rates sooner? So people are going to be focused on the unemployment rate and, of course, the inflation rate coming out this month, because expectations are still going to be relatively high, at least according to projections. PCE coming in at 2.7, they're expecting about 2.74 versus 2.7 now, in CPI 3.56 versus 3.5, so it seems to still be high. So a lot will be data dependent. The Fed has been very data dependent. He said as much, and we'll see what comes out this month. So the pivot about September, factors that could come out sooner than that are what's happening with the data and whether that's going to make it come sooner or not, or indeed later as well if inflation comes in a lot hotter. And that's obviously, and there's also another factor, of course, and that's the fact that the Fed is going to slow the rate of quantitative tightening. I don't know if you know, but in June, they're going to start allowing the amount of treasuries that they're allowed to mature on their balance sheet from 60 billion to 25 billion. So that's going to mean an additional 35 billion per month in liquidity that could come into the markets, which, is going to help, bring sort of liquidity required for the alt season I talked about earlier. But the big pivot itself, potentially in September. So that's when I think we could see the pivot. Okay, next question, and this is another question by Rick Blend. Rick Blend 222 asks again, best Bitcoin layer 2. Yeah, so I mean, I talked about this, of course, in the last Q&A a bit. I think I'm very excited about the Bitcoin layer 2 narrative. I think that it's this Bitcoin renaissance we're going through. It's required for the Bitcoin network long term to keep it secure and sustain it. And I think it's also going to add a lot of value for all Bitcoin holders. Obviously, development can only really blossom when there's when the BitVBM comes out, and you'll allow for rollups to settle on the Bitcoin main chain itself. I mean, so I've talked about some of these Bitcoin L2s before in the previous Q&A, but I'll go through them again quickly. And I'm actually going to I'll leave an image, a graphic, which is shared in our Coin Bureau Discord server, by the way, which if you're not part of it, you can join down below. And it's basically a breakdown of all of the Bitcoin layer 2s by TVL, and it's quite a lot being built out there. And there's some of the popular names you know about. So obviously the top there is Merlin Chain, which is a Bitcoin layer 2 that's using zero-knowledge proofs to scale Bitcoin. And there's many other features such as oracles and NFTs to support blockchain technology. It's got over 1 billion in TVL locked up. There's also other protocols like B Squared network, which I've spoken to the team before, and they seem to be building a lot of exciting tech on top of Bitcoin. BOB, Bull on Bitcoin, very bullish on that. Spoke to the CEO as well about 2 weeks ago. They're basically building an OP stack, a hybrid Bitcoin Ethereum L2 that's transitioning towards a Bitcoin rollup, which will come at a later stage. But they're first utilizing Bitcoin and Ethereum for it to be EVM compatible, and to build this rollup, and then to use the Bitcoin blockchain itself to help secure it. So you've got the combination of both Bitcoin and Ethereum, which is probably going to make it, therefore, if you combine those networks, the most secure L2 or rollup out there. And then one other Bitcoin L2 that I spoke about last week, of course, is Botanix, which is building a Bitcoin L2 proof of stake chain, which is going to be secured with the concept called the Spider chain, which is a collection of different multi-sigs, combination of numerous different multi-sigs that grows out and helps secure the network. The more the people on top of the network, the more validators there are, the more multi-sigs there are, and therefore the more secure the network. This is also really interesting in Bitcoin L2. It's been building since 2022 and hasn't launched yet in terms of a mainnet, but it's one to watch. Both Bob and Botanix haven't launched yet, but they're definitely ones to watch. Okay, and the final question is from, and this is a good one, a bit more dystopian. 19 Dario 86 asks, 1984, how far countries are from that dystopia? Can a decentralized financial system help? Yeah, I definitely think we are getting closer and closer to 1984. And in fact, we make way more close to George Orwell's dystopian nightmare now than any time, especially 1984, and that's because of digital world and our entire life becoming digital. Think about digital electricity grids, digital surveillance, digital news, digital social media, digital IDs, digital banking. All of this is digital, and digital electricity. And why is dystopian? Well, it's because if anyone, and especially when it comes from a centralization perspective, right? Because if someone has centralized control of our digital networks and our digital life, then they can control these different components of it. Digital electricity, they can decide, which places get electricity. Surveillance, they can track you, they can stop you at any border if they want. It's all tied to your passports. Digital news, for instance, obviously we know this right now. News media has a narrative to spin sometimes, and it's often in bed with governments. Social media, what sort of news gets trending? Digital IDs. The government can literally, if it has control over a centralized digital ID database, it can literally delete you as an individual if it wants, if you have only your digital ID. And then, of course, like digital banking, if you have a CBDC, this is why everyone's so petrified of CBDCs, is because if you have a central bank digital currency that your account or your account or wallet contract or whatever is linked to the blockchain that's controlled by the Fed, if they don't like what you say or they don't like what you're doing, they can just seize your bank account or seize your smart contract address and stop you from using your money and restricting it from it. And it doesn't even have to be a CBDC. They've actually done this, right? Blockchains and banks have actually shut people out of them before, right? Because all banking right now is really digital anyway, right? All of these centralized digital components can be controlled if someone gets control of a centralized data, a centralized network, and can decide to you got to play nice, and if you don't, well, your whole entire digital life can be disrupted. So what is the only alternative to this? Decentralized systems, decentralized networks, and obviously one of the most well-known is obviously blockchain, right? Decentralized blockchains. And I think that's why I think that, of course, cryptocurrency is one of the main users right now of a blockchain decentralized network, and money is a lot of what drives our life. I mean, you can't live without money, right? Very difficult. To have full control of your own financial destiny and not have to worry in the future if these components come out, our digital life, and if they try to co-opt you to do it. And the one thing to point out here is this digital transformation is not something you can opt out of. Even if you want to use cash, they're going to start, getting rid of cash eventually. If you don't want a digital ID, they're going to force you to get a digital ID to get a passport. And you can't opt out of it. But there is one way to opt out of it, of course, and that is through cryptocurrency and decentralized networks. And of course, thanks to all you guys for submitting your questions. If you know what you can do. If you want to submit them, you just go down below. We will link to our Instagram down there, and we'll ask you every way about halfway through the week to submit your questions. We try and answer most of them at the end of the week, and if we can't get to them, we sometimes come back and go through more of them. And obviously, we switch around sometimes, between me, Guy, and Jess. So yeah, thanks a lot for the questions, guys. It's been great. Have an amazing week ahead, and stay crypto. Cheers.